Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and at the start of a new week, time to reflect on yet another example of rampant Tory hypocrisy and lack of respect for the law, all rolled into one, as Boris Johnson has been shown to have lied to Parliament as he made a statement wholly at odds with a court order issued just a few days beforehand. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, you may or may not recall the High Court has recently pronounced that the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, acted unlawfully in consistently failing to publish his corrupt PPE contracts within the specified 30-day period. The corruption was fine, legally speaking. Parliament voted to allow Johnson's ministers to spend limitless amounts of public money on contracts without any of the normal procedures being followed. So much power did Parliament give the government that they could literally give tens of millions of pounds to Tory donors or friends. Not a single product or service would have to be given in return, and they wouldn't even have to demand the money back. All perfectly legal. But what was not legal was trying to hide the fact that they were doing this. Even after the judgment was handed down, Matt Hancock was trying to defend himself in interviews. The supercilious arsehole was trying to make out, oh, there wasn't time, we had to act quickly and I would do it again to get the PPE. Unfortunately, few of the people interviewing him pointed out either of the following facts. One, he didn't actually get the PPE. That was the problem, because whilst he was failing to give contracts to actual manufacturers of PPE, he was instead giving it to companies that caught rats or made t-shirts. And one time, even that bloke down the pub that he knew. The second thing is that the judgment had nothing to do with the award of the contracts, nothing to do with the speed of the contracts, nothing to do with the fact that the contracts weren't going out to tender. The judgment was down to the publication of the contracts. Once a contract is issued, it's not a difficult task to just publish it, is it? It already exists. It's not like they have to draw up the contract. The contract exists. It's just a basic bit of admin to share it with the world. The permitted 30 days is plenty of time, particularly in this digital age. But then Boris Johnson stood up in Parliament a few days later, after the judgment, and said that all contracts had now been published. All storming the teacups, all sorted now, all was right with the world. With the possible exception of the 125,000 dead, the hundreds of thousands of grieving families, the hundreds of thousands more losing their jobs, and the 3 million people who haven't received a penny of pandemic-related support despite losing their incomes as a result of government orders. The only problem is that not all of the contracts have been published, as it happens. The court order notes that, and I quote, "The defendant has published 608 out of 708 relevant contracts for supplies and services relating to COVID-19 awarded on or before 7th of October 2020. Now, the Good Law Project, which is the group that brought the action along with a group of MPs, has pointed out that the judge was going by the government's own figures. So according to the government's own figures, there were at least 100 contracts still not published within the legal limit at the point the judgment was made. And this judgment only covers contracts up to last October. As far as I know, there could well be others that have been awarded and still not published within the 30 days. They also point out that failing to publish the details of these contracts is not simply unlawful, but damaging to the country. The reason the law stipulates that these contracts must be published is because the public have a right to know how our money is spent. Every penny of public money must be a matter of public scrutiny. 30 days is actually really generous, when all you have to do is copy a file which already exists to a public register. It's not even like we have to mess about with lots of photocopying and physical copies like that now. Digital world, incredibly quick and efficient to do this. The reason that these contracts are not being published on time is specifically to hamper public scrutiny. They stop people seeing what's going on until so much time has passed that it becomes much less newsworthy. It's a cynical ploy to hide the fact that they are taking our money and giving it to friends and donors. And it's the giving it to donors that ironically is the worst aspect of it, because this is how it works. Donors give Conservatives some money. Now, normally what happens when someone donates money to a political party, it's because they want that political party in government, because either they feel it's for the better public good, or just that they feel it'd be better for them. And that's fine, that's okay. But that's not what's happening here, because those donors then get a lucrative contract where they won't be punished if they don't actually deliver on it satisfactorily. So the donor isn't actually donating, because they get that money back and then some. It's a financial investment for them. In return, the Conservatives get a large war chest to use to con the public into voting for them again. And the whole hideous cycle carries on. It's not costing the donors anything to actually donate because they get all that money back. It's not costing the Conservatives any money because it's our money. And this was bad enough before Johnson's time. But now that he and his ministers will tell the most outrageous lies when they're found out, it makes it even more dangerous. So Boris Johnson misled Parliament, and it was a prepared statement. So he would have had the key facts as well. That makes it deliberately misleading Parliament. Because you can sometimes understand a minister being surprised by a question or a statement in the House. They respond with something that isn't true, but they do so innocently. They didn't actually realise it wasn't true because they hadn't prepared for it. As soon as the error is pointed out, they apologise and correct the record. It's unfortunate, but it's inevitable that that sort of thing will happen, and that's fine. You don't make a big fuss about that. But this wasn't the case here. He knew he was making that statement. He knew in advance. That means he had access to the government figures. Senior civil servants do not allow a minister, much less the Prime Minister, to make a prepared statement in Parliament without the full facts. And that means that Boris Johnson has broken the Ministerial Code. And bear in mind that as Prime Minister, it is Boris Johnson who wrote the Ministerial Code. Each Prime Minister lays down the parameters for the ministers whom they appoint. The Ministerial Code tends not to differ much from PM to PM, but nonetheless, they write the code. I'll put a link in the description below along with the court order. The penalty for breaking the Ministerial Code is supposed to be resignation. Naturally, this will not occur. In fact, Boris Johnson is unlikely to even try and make out that he mistakenly misled Parliament and just apologise. And given that we've had proof, not just evidence, but actual proof that some of his own ministers have broken the code and are still in place, the Ministerial Code is now officially worthless. But coming at the time it did is also an example of raging hypocrisy, because last week, First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, was facing a grilling from the Scottish Parliament. I'd already talked a little about that. Now, during the proceedings, Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross said that Sturgeon had misled Parliament, broken the Ministerial Code and should resign. Okay, fair enough. Except, of course, as I noted before, if you think that Sturgeon should resign, then you should also be calling for the resignation of Boris Johnson and several of his ministers by the same token. But in the same week that Conservatives, such as Ross, were calling for Sturgeon's head, we didn't hear a peep out of them about Boris Johnson breaking his own Ministerial Code by deliberately misleading Parliament with a statement in direct contradiction to his own government figures and a recently handed down court order. Because here's the thing, you can believe that none of these people should resign. That would be a political point of view which you could hold without any trace of hypocrisy. You can also believe that Johnson, Patel and Hancock should resign over breaching the Ministerial Code, but Sturgeon should not, although I would argue most of the people who would do that would be SNP supporters. But what you cannot do is to call for Sturgeon to resign, who arguably has broken the code, but not as seriously as Johnson, Hancock or Patel, without calling for the Conservative code breakers to also go. Because for an opinion to hold any moral authority, it has to be consistent, free of tribal bias. Because anything else is just partisan tribalism, which is the most toxic enemy that mankind has ever had, quite frankly. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.